really happened. 1865 to 1925. This is the full length documentary or documentary series, depending on kind of where you're watching this. And we're going to get into a lot of stuff that has really went mainstream in the conspiracy communities and the research communities over the past 5 to 10 years. So, if you have an understanding about the concepts of the old world, Tartary or Tartaria, and the mud flood, we can start to discuss and understand that the historical timeline is not a representation of the actual accounting of our story backed by fact. No historian or scholar understands the concepts of Tartaria, the Old World, the mud flood, the flat earth, the mud fossils, the great fires, the giants or the giant bones, as well as many other concepts we have uncovered over the past few years. Now, this shows us that we have been taught by the people who we have labeled as the controllers. If you have an understanding of these concepts, you can identify those who just repeat the talking points and jargon that they were taught by those who hid the truth from us all. They are only liable for the version of reality that was created by the controllers to control the people and govern them in a way so that they are controlled. Was there a massive realm wide repopulation effort that took place? Was there a reset event that has been covered up? Do we live in a false reality? And how can we escape this matrix of control and false information? Now, if you're familiar with some of my past work, I did a What's Really Happening video on the Second Great War or World War II. It's a full length documentary that really gets into what was really going on during World War II, focusing on Operation Paperclip, Operation High Jump, the Roswell crash, the CIA, Israel, and all of the kind of events that happened as the Second World War was wrapping up, and how those events really get us into the new world order that we're in today. So, this series will act like a prequel to that video and many other videos, focusing on our timeline and our story. Now, we see many similarities with the timeline of historical events surrounding World War I and the world we see today. First, we must acknowledge that the things we were taught are false. Why were we never taught the truth? When we look at what has been hidden, the same kind of ideas circulate within doing this research. The old world and Tartaria, the giants of the old world, architecture of the old world, mystery of the giant trees, the mud flood, and the great fires. Now, as I discuss these topics in different video segments, I'm going to round that out with a summary and conclusion. We're going to get into the old world high technology a little bit, and also there will be an old world slideshow. So there's lots to this documentary series, and we're going to try to give you, the viewer or the listener, a better understanding of these topics. So, the narratives that dictate the ideas within our reality are based on the fraud and disinformation of the controllers. This is how a selective few can hold the secrets that become the key to keeping us enslaved. The controllers give you propaganda that they pass off as the truth. When you start to break down any aspect of their story, everything becomes a lie, and we can prove the deception very easily. Remember that truth is subjective to the observer. Now, if you rely on the controllers to give you your version of reality, you cannot question anything associated with their version of our story. If you begin to question reality and the controller's version of our story, you will begin to find a new story that is more factual than the stories that we were given. It's the search for truth and understanding, and then research for fact and foundation. And this is how all of this kind of works. You search the truth and you get the understanding of the controllers. You research the story we were given, you understand the facts and get at the foundational level of all of these arguments, where they all come from, and how they were created. So, one of the things that stands out to me is the mysterious Cenero Arrow Club from 1850. If you haven't seen my documentary on it, you should check it out. It does contain pieces of this puzzle that we are trying to reassemble to understand our place in this realm. The lost, highly advanced civilization and technology, and our hidden history. So I've done a documentary on the Sonora Aero Club from 1850. You can see that on my Patreon page. You can see it on Rumble, and it will kind of act sort of like a prequel to this video, giving you information of what was going on and what was documented during this 1850s time period. So it's a good one to go back and watch if you're interested. So, when getting into this research, the individual must know and understand the timeline of historical events, which is history or his story, versus the research and newly uncovered information and facts of our story. These things are for you to see, and for others, they are a test. And as we move forward, we will ask the question, what really happened? And I hope we will answer that for you, the viewer. What really happened? 1865 to 1925, the full length documentary. Our reality or our story is continuously filled with war and a small group of elites controlling the population of our realm with lies. They create a story or narrative, plan and carry out false flags which get us into these wars. Because of this, millions of people die and the rest are controlled. This is how a selective few can pull the strings and remain in control. No one ever seems to question anything. No one ever seems to ask why. Who is doing this? Are they Jewish? Are they members of a secret society? Are they Freemasons or Illuminati cult members? Are they extraterrestrials? Or is it something darker like demonic entities? When we start to ask the right questions, we are led to the answers that the general public will never accept. The information is out there for anyone to find if they know where to look and if they have the will to look. If you start to understand the ideas of the old world and the mud flood, plus the repopulation aspect of our realm, we must question all of the official stories of war. At some point in our story, civilization was at a point that the world could be taken over and transformed into the world we see and know today. Now, many will talk about bankruptcy of government and foreign monarchies, owning the people with fraudulent documents like birth certificates and social security cards. They may also talk about the capturing of flags. But this also seems like a way of holding information that most cannot conceptualize and using it against them. No matter what information is discovered, we can't seem to escape these controllers and the system that controls us. So, what really happened? The timeline of historical events, summary and decode, the first known Great Reset. Now, the end of the 19th century birthed the beginning of the 20th century. The end of this century would prepare the U.S. for many coming changes. By the end of the 1900s, America would see the end of the threats from native populations and the rise of global conflict and world wars. The true amount of native people that were killed is unknown. Anywhere from 40 million to 250 million people were killed by the invading resetters or the settlers. The native population was most likely the Tartarians or the people of Tartary. These colonizers were the controllers under the influence of an extraterrestrial parasite we have come to know as the black goo. Now, this black goo is a advanced research topic, but it's something you should be familiar with or familiarize yourself with. I've done a full length documentary on that. So go check that out at some point to just kind of get the concepts and ideas into your mind of what this is and how it affects the people of our realm. So, after the destruction of the native cultures and the repopulation of the new inhabitants by the way of the orphan trains and the construction of the railroads would provide the infrastructure needed to frequently access deep underground facilities. Now, most likely these were constructed by the old world civilization and then repurposed for secret operations. Now, according to mainstream history, Christopher Columbus discovers America, the 13 colonies are formed, many countries attempt to colonize America, from France, Prussia, England, Spain, Holland, and many others. Expansion begins along with war with the native populations. Now, war with England occurs and our freedom is supposedly gained. Then America, as an independent nation, continues to expand its territory. Many people from all countries and nations immigrate to the U.S. Here's a map of the colonies and how slowly, every 50 years we're expanding out the territory further and further. And that's what the mainstream historians will all stick to. This is the story that was given to us, and this is the story that they go by. So many old world maps discount a lot of the claims made by historians. The people who were horse and wagon people through the eyes of our historical record are the ones responsible for the creation of America. Or were they? Now you can see as the people start expanding out in one direction from east to west, there's also Spain on the west coast pushing inward. And it's like an invasion of the territory, if you want to see it that way. Now, while America, a new nation, was still being formed and expanded, along with other nations occupying territory, America then goes to war with itself over the argument of slavery. Now, the U.S. goes to war, the North versus the South, and then masses amount of debt are accumulated, supposedly accumulated, to the amount of $2.6 billion after 1865 when this war took place. Now, supposedly, this is how the United States was recaptured by England in 1871 after the Civil War in 1865. So we have a massive civil war. The American Civil War resulted in an estimated 620,000 to 750,000 deaths, making it the deadliest conflict in the U.S. history. Once again, not mentioning how many of the native people were all killed off before then. Now, this figure includes both combat related deaths and those who died from diseases, which accounted for a significant portion of the fatalities. Now, on top of that, add in the 40 million to 250 million native deaths associated with the colonization and war, and that does not include the 40 to 60 million deaths in South America when the Spanish arrived. So you see from 1776 onward, just a massive amount of death, and then the continuation of building America and creating it. So everything surrounding our historical record makes little sense and no one ever questions anything. So we have to ask what really happened and what is really going on. If we discount everything we were told and investigate the past as independent researchers, a new story begins to be seen. Now, when you begin to question the people who gave us the story of our past, you find that they have deliberately hidden many things from us. Why would they do that if they were truthful and honest? Well, the more research you do, the more truth backed by fact you discover. Before the controllers took over, mankind relied on the Bible to govern themselves and using its teachings to act as a moral compass. Why would people who worship the same God go to war with each other for some arbitrary control? Like everything in this world, we always see two sides fighting for control of the people and our realm. It's good versus evil, light versus dark, and the people who support one or the other. If those who worship the darkness were secretly the ones behind the subversion of our realm, how would we know? What clues could we find? Followers of evil, followers of good, always two systems. Now, I've done a video in the past, if you want to check it out, called The Two Vibrational Codes of Our Realm, and that will explain with facts how there is always two systems working against each other, trying to control the people, trying to control reality, trying to control everything. So we investigate our historical record and the possibilities of our historical record being fabricated. Looking into the past, one of the major things we find is how selective the story we were given is. What was included, what was left out. When looking at maps from our past, we see many things that are not allowed to be discussed, and one of those being Tartaria or Tartary. We look at old maps and we see this Tartaria, and no historian seems to know anything about it or its people. Why? What was this? Why was it excluded from our story? Here you can see the map of Tartaria and how all this connects and how close it is to America. The more and more we research and look to our past for answers, the more we see the deceptions of the controllers. If our history was rewritten, we have to assume events, locations, and people could have been invented or hidden to pass off their deceptions. This would mean discoveries could have been invented or fabricated to pass off the narratives of the controllers, the discoveries, and the people responsible for all the discoveries, all a fabrication of the controllers. Inventions or objects could have been found, and then a story was created to justify their existence. Science was created to pass off known information from a pre reset time period. Now, one of the main things we see throughout this research are the vast amounts of biblical connections that keep coming up. No matter how many we see or find, the controllers will tell us to not accept them and to trust them and their version of history and science. And when you understand this, our story becomes more and more realized. Why was Tartaria removed from our historical record? To answer this, we have to look to biblical accounts and ideas. Now, the millennial reign of Christ refers to a future period often interpreted as lasting 1,000 years, during which Jesus Christ will reign on earth, bringing peace and righteousness. This concept is primarily derived from Revelation 20 in the Bible, which describes Christ's rules and the resurrection of believers during this time. Now, it is what we're trying to prove, or what the evidence suggests, is that this was the 1,000 year kingdom of Tartary or Tartaria. Now, after this, Satan is released after the millennial kingdom to test humanity one last time, allowing people to choose between following God or succumbing to the deception. This event demonstrates that sin remains in the human heart independent of Satan's influence, as many will still reject God despite knowing his existence. Now, after the millennial reign of Christ, there will be a second resurrection for those who have not yet had the opportunity for salvation, followed by the great white throne judgment. Ultimately, Satan will be cast into the lake of fire, and God will create a new heaven and new earth where righteousness dwells forever. And this would be interpreted as the true golden age. Now, we have not yet entered this time period yet due to Satan and his chosen people being in current control of our realm. Now, all people are being tested and sorted. You will know them by the fruits of their labor. So, what evidence do we have for this theory to be true? We must go back to Tartaria for the answer. Now, if you look at this old map of Tartaria, they want to make it seem as if this Tartaria was only in Russia and parts of Europe and things like that. But when you dig a little deeper and you do a little bit more exploring, you'll find that Russia and America are right next to each other. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that this Tartaria would expand out throughout Russia and never get to America. Okay, so we look at this map of Russia and Alaska, which is the United States, Canada, North America, and things like that. They're very, very close together. And that is one of the biggest clues of the old world. Because when you examine this old world and Tartaria, you see the similar architecture, similar technology, a similar type of people. And that is a big clue to the widespread operation or the wide spanning civilization of this Tartary. Okay, now this location here is what we're going to be looking at next. This is known as Arzareth. Now, when you understand that our historical record was rewritten by these people who took over and are these controllers, the people who follow, their God instead of our God, and they would have changed all the stories and fabricated numerous people and figured out ways to push our timeline back further and further and further so that people would not understand how recent this old world and this widespread spanning civilization or the millennial reign of Christ actually was. They want to put certain events and say they haven't happened yet when they already have came and went, and we're in the after time. So here you see this Arzareth, and it's very close to Nazareth. So Jesus of Nazareth, and this goes into the belief that this Genghis Khan was Christ born as this Genghis Khan. And Khan equals king. So Genghis king, Jesus king, it's all very similar. And if you ask God to show you and you look into this, it kind of becomes obvious what was going on, what happened, and how this old world or this Tartaria was created. Everything was built as if it was a tribute to God and creation. And you can see that in the architecture and in the people of the time. So, very interesting piece of information that you have to put into the story to figure out our place and what is going on. So, it appears that the 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus was the kingdom of Tartary. And the more you look into and research it, the more you will find this to be true. And this is why so many of our historical figures and historical record may have been fabricated to hide this information. Tartaria was a kingdom, Jesus Christ was the king, and we know him as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Now, we really need to keep this information in mind as we uncover more and more information. The idea that this millennial reign of Christ took place and that Satan has now been released on to the people. Now, Satan being a fallen angel or the collective consciousness of evil or sin, we should re examine the idea of what Satan is. Now, this is where the black goo kind of comes into the picture. Black goo is the physical manifestation of Satan or evil, and evil is the emerging virtual intelligent life forms. It all connects when you have the correct information that you can base your ideas or theories on. All of this kind of starts making a lot more sense, and you could see the world in a different way. So, see my documentary on the black goo to understand this more. It will answer a lot of these questions and change your perspective on kind of what's going on and what really happened. Now, Satan is the AI that has taken over our realm, rewritten our historical record, invented all of these ideas and theories of science, put the chosen people of Satan into positions of power and influence, and these are the people we are up against and the ones who control our realm. Now, the only thing we do not know is the precise date all of this has occurred. Now, if we investigate the timeline of historical events, the 1850s era is kind of where the news story of our record gets going after this reset. Now, if there was a rapture type event or a mass depopulation that occurred, the mud flood, war, biological weapons, or all of the above. We know these events happened, and we have the evidence to support these claims. Now, we know that something happened realm wide. We know that the entire realm was covered in mud and that cities were left empty and vacant. A story was fabricated to explain the vacant cities and towns, and the historical record or history was rewritten to prop up any story created by the satanic black goo or Lucifer and his people. Now, after the mud hardened, the city could have been inhabited again. All areas under the mud would have been accessed by reclaiming the structures that were buried. So any destruction that was seen would have been blamed on war, and the lack of people could have been blamed on disease. Now, everything Satan does is a bad copy of what was created by God or Jesus Christ and the followers of Christ. God creates the earth, Satan creates a digital program to simulate earth. God sends a flood to destroy man who was corrupted. Satan creates a mud flood to bury the land and the people of God. God recreates man in his image. Satan clones man and changes mankind to humanity. So we see when we look back in time empty cities realm wide with similar architecture as if something happened and all of a sudden everyone was gone instantly. Slowly, through the science of human cloning, we see civilization getting back on track around 1820 to 1890. Now, the clones would have all been taught a new version of reality, history, science, and technology. Anything that would go against the reset knowledge would be excluded and hidden from the general population. We can also theorize that pockets of civilization would have survived the resets and would work against the controllers and their new order of the ages. Now, this is another reason why the native populations or the survivors had to be removed due to them possibly knowing what happened before the reset events took place. Now, see my video on human cloning to understand this further, but the arguments we make for what we propose, there's a lot more evidence that support our claims rather than their claims of it just happened the way they said it happened back in 1820. So, very interesting. You might want to check that out also. It will help you understand this further. So, this in essence is the whole of the conspiracy and the information we are uncovering. If you understand this and at the foundational level of the old world conspiracy along with Tartaria, we can move forward to uncovering the evidence and clues needed to prove our claims. So, resetting civilization after this mud flood, 1820 to 1890. Now, after the Civil War, America was in debt, and then the controllers decide to create a railroad system across the United States, not rebuild the South. So we were $2.6 billion in debt, but we still had the money to finance a transcontinental railroad. Now, knowing what we know, did they build it or reclaim it from something that was already in place? The evidence suggests that the Transcontinental Railroad was old world technology, pre reset, that was then dug up, reaccessed, and reinvented to support the newer reset version of our reality. And we can see them digging out New Amsterdam, which was New York in the 1800s. We see destruction in these photos. We see massive amount of dirt realm wide with buried railroad ties and everything connecting to everything else. Now, accessing the buried buildings and the lost civilization from after the fact of this realm wide mud flood. So they the controllers, if you think about it like they knew some big event was happening, they all go into their underground bases, and then 10, 15 years go by, they go back to the surface and try to reclaim everything, dig up the railroads in order to access more and more and claim more and more. So this when you look at the Union Pacific Railroad or the Northern Pacific Railroad and all this stuff, the buildings are all like mud flooded, and it would have been under the ground is where these terminals would have been. And they would have known this because if they would have, after the mud would have hardened or something, they'd get into this railroad terminal. They'd find all these maps of where these tunnels would all lead to. They would explore these tunnels and then found, where the access points would have been located. So once the railroads were uncovered and rebuilt, industries would be created for war armaments and equipment. Child labor and the possibility of human cloning would ensure that the controllers would always stay in control. The same people involved in sex trafficking today are the same people who used child labor in the 1800s and into the 1900s. Now, the Industrial Revolution Phase 1 was between 1760 and 1840. Industrial Revolution Phase 2 would have been 1850 to 1920. And you can see throughout our history the use of child labor and all these children. Where are all these children coming from? Why aren't they at home? Why aren't they with their parents? And they would explain it away as the parents died in war, the parents died from diseases. But when you look at how history repeats and how they want to reclone people and all this stuff, it's very interesting. And it's a big piece of the puzzle we have to acknowledge in order to figure out what is really going on. Lots of examples of this. So, repopulation and expansion west, the wagon trains, and the settlers. So when you look at all our old pictures of these settlers, the historical photographs all show this mud and stuff everywhere. Everything covered with dirt and these buildings just sticking out of the ground. Now you can see this by where the arrows are. The red arrow points to a doorway out in the middle of the building up high. The mud slammed up against the buildings, and they're trying to access things by the green arrow, figuring out where the ground level is. And once they find the ground level, they know how much to dig. Is it worth digging them out all the way? Or are they just going to pave new streets and, create a deception or a lie to fit the narrative they needed? Now, the gold rush, followed by the Civil War, would finance operations and activities of the New World Order. The money or wealth stolen from America was used to finance the technology lost during the reset or to redevelop the technology as needed. Another reason for the vast amount of money stolen was to re educate the population into believing the new narratives and fund the public and private school systems. This would aid those resetting in more ways than one. Once in charge of the education system, any lie can be passed off as the truth, from Columbus to the founding fathers. Our research show there is no way of proving these characters actually existed. If something is questioned, a new story is installed or a discovery is made to push whatever agenda is needed. Now, the more we look into and research history as we know it, the AI seems to work in opposition, creating false pictures and evidence to lead us astray. And I think this is more proof that our current historical record was created by AI. The pictures, the people, the inventions, the story, all possible fabrications of artificial intelligence. And we know the AI responsible has connection to this black goo substance that keeps popping up over and over and over. Now, are these real pictures or is this AI? The more you research old pictures, the more you see AI creations. And that way, there is some type of plausible deniability to where if anybody finds an old picture, they can claim it was AI. And if anybody finds a new picture, they can claim that as AI. It's a way they can pick and choose whatever they want in order to keep the deception going. This could be real pictures. It all could be fake. The argument is that all of the older pictures we see, they were all fake and created in order to pass off their deceptions. Now, if there was a realm wide event, the controllers would know where towns and cities were prior to the event taking place. Now, the mini gold rushes would have been a cover to reacquire towns and cities under the mud. Now, this may also connect to underground lines, train lines, things like that from the old world, subways, pneumatic transit tunnels that would have and did exist. We have the evidence to support the claims. So here you can see drawings and illustrations of these pneumatic train lines, and you can see how they were widespread. Many of these towns and cities have subway lines and things like that. And this is one of the big keys to if they're showing you this, what do they have that they are not showing you and that they are still concealing? Now, another big clue to all of this is the red bricks that is used to create many of the buildings, the streets, the sidewalks, and these underground areas. Now, this weathering that you see is caused by heavy rain and water damage and the prolonged exposure to the water. So, these pneumatic trains and tunnels had to have been submerged and were left submerged for a long time to cause this kind of weathering on the bricks. Now, sometime after the 1800s, causing the weathering and the disrepair. Now, I would imagine the vacuum type tubes would have lost pressure, making them inoperable. As you can see on the side of the walls, the smoothness of the bricks all kind of disappears. And now here you can see them as they're reclaiming old world structures underground. They have to build access points, which they could then transport themselves in and out of our realm to other cities, towns, and things like that. And it's just odd. Their building techniques and the way they build doesn't seem to match up with the type of building that we see in the old world. And always on the sides, you can see the brick ruins. And it's really unknown how much mud covers the old world and where the actual street level is, how far down the basements go, and things like that. But we can see them accessing these tunnels, reclaiming them because they would know where these tunnels lead to, if some of them lead miles down into these supposed underground bases and things like that that have been talked about widely throughout our research for the truth. If you follow the Phil Schneider and all that kind of stuff, so there is a big connection from this old world to the reclaiming of these cities and towns, as if they're just going to build a subway system underneath these buildings. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you understand that in the basements of the buildings, there are, train depot stations and stuff. And that is a very big key or a piece of the puzzle we have to add in to find what happened in our story. And there's lots of illustrations, there's lots of information that connect to the people who we see using all these towns and cities were not the people who created it. It was all created by a highly, highly advanced group of people, not these settlers who never had education and were basically just farmers and hunters and gatherers, and then all of a sudden forced into these cities to populate them. Anyone who can question things should all have lots of questions, the vastness of this type of information. Now, one of the biggest things people overlook when looking into the old world are the materials used to create it. The number one material used are these red bricks. Now, the weight of the red bricks, the amount of bricks, the logistics of shipping them, and how many bricks would have been used should make anyone question the official stories we were told. Now, a pallet of bricks contains between 400 to 525 bricks. A standard pallet of bricks weighs between 2,000 and 2,500 pounds. So, if you start doing the math and understanding we're talking about possibly trillions and trillions of fucking bricks used to make the sewer systems, the subway lines, the buildings, the monuments, the walls, the floors, it's almost impossible that these people with horses and wagons would be building things out of these bricks. So they were all delivered by horse and wagon. A horse can typically pull a wagon weighing up to 1.5 times its body weight when the load is on wheels. A draft horse can pull even more, sometimes up to 5 times their weight under ideal conditions. For example, a draft horse weighing 2,000 pounds could potentially pull a wagon load of weighing 10,000 pounds. But you're also needing to understand that the roads were dirt, and the second any type of moisture would hit the ground, you're sinking. You're not pulling a 2,000 pounds of bricks. 400 to 500 bricks across the town to build some building. Okay, it doesn't, the numbers will never add up. So then you also take into account the sewer and the subway lines of these bricks underground. So these pictures are all from under Poland, the sewer systems. And you just start looking at the brickwork. It's all perfect. It's flawless. There's no bricks out of place. There's no there's no errors anywhere. It's very interesting. Now you also have to take into account the mortar, mixing the mortar, bringing water, mixing it up, digging all this out for one, and then replacing it with 3 layers of bricks, because it's not just one layer of bricks you see, it's 3 or 4 layers together. And this goes under a city for miles and miles and miles. And we're to believe that people with candlelight, lantern light, horses and wagons did all of this in darkness. How long would this take if every single giant old world city has this under the ground? From Chicago, San Francisco, New York, Seattle, Portland, and you get into England, France, Spain, Poland, all these old world cities that were a part of this Tartarian Empire all have these bricks and brick structures under the ground. So it's very interesting. This is a massive clue that proves these people have not been telling us the truth, because it makes no sense that these people would be building scaffolding under there and doing all this masonry. I mean, for each picture, how long do you think each picture would take in brickwork? How many bricks are there if they're 3 layers deep and things like that? It does not add up, and it will never add up. And they will never answer these questions because they don't truly know. It's written on paper. This was created from 1820 to 1829, and then that's it. Case closed. Move on to the next piece of information. Very interesting thing. And you can look at the weathering on the bricks. This isn't just rainwater. This is like a salt water mixed with other chemicals, which would have caused this wear and tear. Or the cities above were flooded for many, many years before somebody figured out how to open up the drains and drain off the water. Very, very interesting. Now, on top of that, we have all these massive old world brick buildings, all constructed by bricks, and most likely they all have access to these underground areas, whether they're the sewers or the subway or tram lines. Very interesting piece of research. Now, all of these mud flooded buildings, they all are made out of the brick, and it is very it's a piece of evidence that a lot of people aren't looking at how many bricks we're talking about here. Where did they get all the material for the bricks? How did they bake all of these bricks? Ship them, transport them, design these locations, dig out the basements by hand with a little wooden bucket and fabricate these massive buildings. If they had no technology, they had no electricity, they had no hydraulic cranes and dump trucks and things like that. It's a very, very interesting thing to look at. Everything buried under the ground, no one even understanding or knowing what is buried underground. The streets are all made out of bricks, everything's made out of bricks, and when you even look under the sidewalks, the town goes further down into these underground areas. And then they'll create a story that the town flooded and they had to raise the sidewalks. And just completely BS. No one ever questions it, no one ever looks into it. So you have to think what's going on. Now, we've gotten to the New York sewer system, and it is the same type of bricks, the same type of coping, and all this stuff. It's all very similar, as if it was all created by the same group of people. The buildings, the streets, the sewers, the subways, all red bricks, all perfect, no sloppy work, almost like the cities were 3D printed by giant machines. And if you follow cutting edge current technology, the plans for colonizing Mars and all this stuff, the way they plan on getting to Mars is they're sending automated machine equipment which will 3D print a city. And you think Mars is red and the bricks are red. They would use this technology at a future date to colonize Mars or something. It's kind of BS, but that's like a tip that they've done this before and they know how to do it. So, very, very fascinating. Now, when you start to ask questions,
you find less and less answers, and the stories we were all told fall apart. Do you really think people built all of this, transported the bricks, mixed the mortar, all by lantern or candlelight? Now, this may be where the term Freemasonry comes from. This is all of the Freemasonry the controllers stole from the people. They found it, they reclaimed it, and they hid it. And no one would ever guess or understand the vastness of these underground brick facilities, what they're used for, and how it connects. Now, another thing is they recently it was discovered that these bricks, red bricks, can be used as a capacitor to store electrical power. Now, that makes a lot more sense if you understand how much bricks there are, how much energy could have been stored, how the old world buildings connect to free power, and the great um, event that might have caused a backfeeding of electricity, which would have possibly caused the melted buildings and things like that. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So, next, the settlers of America. Now, these are the people who are supposedly responsible, these 12-man crews, either uncovering railroads or the historical record said they were building the railroads, digging out the underground areas and building the basements and things like that. A lot of this makes zero sense. Now, historians will all say whatever the story is. But these are the people who went to college and have never really done a physical day's work of digging in the ground, planting a garden or something. There's no way you're building. It would take you 2 or 3 years just to dig out the basement, let alone transport the bricks, mix the mortar, transport all this stuff. Who's funding all this? It's just so many questions start coming up, and they do not have any answers, and they will not engage you in debate or any kind of conversation about this. Now you can see this is how these people build these wooden buildings, very basic, but you can see this is kind of still how we build today, as opposed to the massive, giant, old world superstructure buildings. And all of these pictures, some of them just don't make sense. And they should be questioned like, what is going on here? And then we look into older uh, images and lithographs and tracings and stuff, and we see the same kind of Greco-Roman buildings. We see destruction. We see all this stuff from some massive event that most likely took place. Settler towns or frontier towns. Now, these towns would pop up on the way two underground access points. Now, if the distance between underground access points was too vast, a small town would be set up and ran for the people working to dig out the points of interest wanted or needed by the controllers. Now, most of these locations contained similar markers or brick buildings, and they would usually also have Masonic lodges. Now, they were also coined as boom towns. Now, this could have been towns established after direct energy weapon strikes or boom strikes, as they're also called within the controller vernacular language. Now, these towns could have been reset and were now safe to move in and populate. Technology collected, wealth captured, narrative installed, and now repopulation could occur. Now, how this kind of works is the towns without old world brick buildings would have been just abandoned after construction. Now, supposedly, when the gold or silver dried up, the people would no longer be paid to live in a specific area and they would be moved to a new location. Now, if they were doing what they were doing was secret. They could have been killed off and the town burnt down, depending on what kind of discoveries were made. But to understand this, if you knew there were these deep underground military bases or old world cities, and they had these train lines, maglev trains or something connecting them, they would know that there was a train that went from, let's say, Oregon to San Francisco. Now, in between that would have been train stops. And wherever the train would stop, they would go to the surface and they would find an abandoned town, where then they would decide, are they going to get this town back up and running? Are they going to use their technology to blow up the buildings, cause a great fire, cause something like that? And then would they destroy it or would they reset it up? And that is a big part of how they knew what to build, what, where, and why. And you can just see, who knows how deep these buildings go, what's underneath. But always these old world brick buildings are a big key to understanding that there was a town here before the reset took place. And in some cases, they might have seen these from airships and said there's a town, and they went in to, scavenge for supplies, look for technology, see if there was any kind of information that had to be hidden or controlled. So, once you understand the scale to how big everything is, the amount of work it would take to build these underground sewer systems, the buildings, all this stuff, water and mud could make a big difference when you see where and how all of this fits into the larger whole of our realm. Now, the farther back the pictures you see, the more flat and level everything looks. Now, this is a big key to understanding the mud flood. Now, imagine water covering everything. Let's say a mile of water. Let's say 100 feet of water. Let's say 200 feet of water. Then at the base of the water, you have all of the sediment that's in the water. If you fill up a bucket, let's say, and add 2 scoops of dirt and mix it up, and the water is muddy, let it sit for a few days, and the water will separate and the dirt will be at the bottom. Now, imagine water and mud covering everything and then draining. The residual leftovers would have been this mud flood. Now, you have to understand how all of these theories and ideas come together into a new version of reality that is truthful and based in fact. We have to discount what they told you and investigate everything for yourself, for ourselves. We do our own research and we come to our own conclusions. And anytime you start looking into flat Earth or posting any information about it, all these globe people come out of the woodworks. They're all like Freemasons and they all do not want you looking into this at all. Because once you have the idea that it's a flat realm and that accounts for this mud flood, and you have the evidence everywhere from Moscow to England to San Francisco to every single place has the same depth of mud flooded buildings everywhere, it has to lead you to believe that something flat exists, filled up with water, and then drained off at the same level. And that is a big piece of this information that they do not want you to look into because of the satanic takeover of our realm and how the satanic ideas were all created around the same time period to get you to keep working, be controlled, and them being in charge, slowly replacing God and Jesus Christ with science and evolution and the Big Bang and their theory of dinosaurs and all this stuff kind of goes all together when you're understanding we are dealing with this satanic collective consciousness, and the people who hold these lies are the people who worship this satanic energy as a god.
What really happened? 1865 to 1925, the new full length documentary series available to watch on Patreon for all Patreon members. It is a two-part documentary series. The part one focuses on the old world and Tartaria, the giants of the old world, the architecture of the old world, and the mystery of the giant trees. In part two, we get into the mud flood and the great fires. There's a great summary and conclusion section that focuses on the conclusion of the timeline around the 1925 time period, old world high technology, and the final old world slideshow. Part one of this video series, we investigate the things connecting to the timeline of historical events, the history or his story versus research and newly uncovered information and facts of our story. The old world and Tartaria, why was this hidden, what this information leads to, and who this information leads to. I also get into the resetting of the old world and those who came after the Great Reset. We talk about the giants of the old world, who were the inhabitants of the old world and Tartaria, who built the cities and the infrastructure, and where did they go. Then there is an architecture of the old world. It is a slideshow presentation, advanced people with advanced technology, and then we get into the mystery of the giant trees. What evidence is there to support the claims for the giant trees and the information surrounding the giant tree conspiracy? Then, in part two of this video series, we investigate all the evidence connecting to the mud flood and the great fires, more understanding and evidence, mega cities of the old world, if not reclaimed or repurposed by the controllers. After the mud flood reset, they would be destroyed by these great fires. And then there is a summary and conclusion, putting all the information together and reviewing our timeline of historical events. And then we get into the advanced old world high technology, another slideshow presentation to understand what may have been possible while resetting the old world. And there is modern American gangsters' final thoughts and ideas. And there is a final slideshow of the old world with lots of the pictures and things I have accumulated over the past 20 years of research, looking into all of these things and compiling all the pictures and evidence that we have. So we ask ourselves what really happened, why was this hidden, when did this happen, and who has done this? What really happened? Available now on Patreon, Modern American Gangster. Individual segments will be released in parts to Rumble, BitChute, YouTube, and Twitter. But if you want to see the new series in full, please support me on Patreon. You could buy them individually, part one or part two, for $4.99 a piece. Each video is almost 3 hours long. You can purchase them separately, or you can subscribe for $10 and watch all my content on Patreon. Almost 6 hours of information in this documentary series alone. Those who support my work and research are greatly appreciated. When you see the world differently, everything changes. And it's on Patreon. What really happened? The new two-part documentary series. I hope you will check it out, and I hope you enjoy this new video series.